And action. So, let's start with Angela. Who was Angela?
Angelo Ernest Cullen was my father, who was born in Arnstein, Ontario. His mother was a Bruni, Brunne, who died when she was 25, I believe, of appendicitis.
Bruni's the last name?
Yeah.
And what was her nationality?
She was Canadian, but she was born in Canada. And my father was born in Canada, but both were of German descent, mainly, but also...
I thought Angela was Italian.
That sounded... Well, he was German, Italian, Irish, and Scottish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he was a bit of a mixture. I believe his mother, Mary, was mostly German. Anyway, she was very lovely and unfortunately died when he was 2.
Jeez.
And he had a brother a couple of years older named Stan. They were taken to live in Manitoba around almost then when their mother died, and lived with relatives out there on the mother's side, who were very kind and very nice to them. And then they came back to Ontario and lived with their dad and his new wife, who was very cruel to them, and they ran away and went back out west when they were younger than 10.
What?
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Do you know much about that story? The runaway part?
I don't know much. My father... Our parents didn't talk much about themselves back in that day. Everything was pretty secretive. It was during the war that I started to hear about it, you know. We moved into a lumber camp because my mother was Austrian and had I guess at that time probably had a pretty good accent. Anyway, living in the lumber camp was sort of like hiding out from...
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that part.
Yeah. I remember that she wrote letters to her mother and sister back in Austria that always, when she got replies, there were always big black marks through it where they censors took out certain things. And
so
my father and his brother, I guess, just did whatever young people do when they came back here. They, you know, farmed and worked in lumber camps. And
I remember Grandpa telling me he made ball bearings. Angelo did.
Oh my God. When we lived in the lumber camp, it was like heaven. And I used to follow my father around all the time. He'd get up about 5 in the morning, and so would I, and I'd toddle off after him. Well, it wasn't exactly toddle. I think I was 5. So we would go early in the morning and feed the horses, which was my favorite thing.
Yep.
And hang around the blacksmiths. And my father could do blacksmithing as well, and it was just fascinating to watch him making babbitts, ball bearings with babbit. And you'd have this kind of a cup with a long handle, a really heavy lead cup, I guess it was.
Yep.
It was hard though. Anyway, and he'd heat it over the forge, and then they'd pour it into this thing. It was like liquid mercury running down and come into these little balls that would fall into water.
Cool.
Oh, it was so exciting. I loved watching that. And I used to love watching the horses getting shod. and a
Shod, not shot.
shod. Yeah. My father was the millwright, and very popular with the men. We lived in a unlined cabin. It had basically one room and then curtains across for the bedroom at the back. Outdoor plumbing. Indoor heat stove.
Yep. Wood burning
We-
stove.
Yeah, we'd wake up in the morning covered with frost on our blankets, and they'd break the ice to get water to heat for tea or coffee.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was chilly.
And that was up in
That was back in the woods from South River, which is halfway up to North Bay.
okay.
So it's kind of central Ontario.
Right.
And we'd go back in, well, from, I guess the roads would open around the 24th of May, we could get out. And then after September, we never got out again. We stayed in from September till May. They'd go out in the summer and get all kinds of supplies and stuff like that.
Right. How many people were at the camp?
There was probably about 40 workers, and then 4 cooks, and then a few people that did the slop work, dishes, and then there were a few pigs and cows that they would butcher.
Mm-hmm.
It was an amazing life. It was, I loved it then, and I love it looking back on it. My mother came from Vienna, and she was used to going to operas and ballets and plays and all kinds of cultural things, art galleries. Her best friend danced ballet and performed in operas. And the family always went to them. My grandfather, who of course I didn't know because he died in the First World War, he went to war and they never saw him again. He was a dealer in the, it's not a king, what do they have? Oh dear. Emperor. Anyway, no, I forget what he was called. Anyway, he was a dealer in his gaming house, and so my family was, on that side, was very, very wealthy. My mother had 2 sisters, Camilla and Berta, and Berta had TB, and the doctors told the family that the only way she would survive is to come to Canada and breathe the Canadian air. So they bought her a ticket and she prepared to come. And unfortunately she died before she sailed, so they sent my mother.
That's a pretty crazy way for the family to get to Canada.
Anyway, my mother came to visit relatives here, to stay here, to use the ticket. Milla couldn't come because she was working. And my mother was working, but she wasn't that, I guess, committed. Anyway, she came, and while she came, the stock market crashed. And her sister contacted her and said, if there's any way you can stay in Canada, stay there. We've lost everything. There are no jobs, we have no money, and we're just barely existing. So my mother stayed, and she hated Toronto, hated everything about it. So she had a cousin who lived in Arnstein, which is in from Trout Creek, which is north from South River, which is south from North Bay. Anyway, she went to live back there and she really liked it. And then she married my father and had my brother, and then she had me. And then the war began, and so they moved into this lumber camp, remote lumber camp. I guess all lumber camps are pretty remote, or were. And when I think of how amazing she was to go from the dazzle of Vienna and go live in this unheated cabin with no bathroom, and every day she would make us go for a walk with her because she said it was just too beautiful not to. And in winter we'd bundle up and it would be freezing cold. She'd take us walking out the logging roads and talk about how beautiful it was. And probably that's why I absolutely love nature. I'm more comfortable running the bush than I am running the streets in Toronto. We moved, my brother hated it. All he did was read magazines about New York and try to get hold of anything he could get about city life. I can't. And what else do I know?
That's a good amount of time for that
That's
clip.
enough?
Yep.